Well, welcome everybody to the unusual day of the week for the Ask the Expert webinar from First Canada. Today we have actually a real expert. Usually we have Canadian experts, but this is an international expert. We have Frank Merrick with us from First, as we usually refer to it in Canada, from First HQ. And we're going to ask Frank some questions, and feel free to chime in with questions that you might have. And one of us will take the question and read it out to Frank so that we can keep some of the background noise that usually occurs from occurring. But as happens every week, once the webinar is done, the webinar is being recorded as we speak. We will take the recording and we will post it on the First Robotics Canada YouTube channel, and we'll put that link up again, as we do every week after the webinar, on our Facebook page and other social media outfits. Jan will do that for us, who does all of our social media currently. And you'll get a chance to watch it with your team or listen, and you certainly can, after the fact, can ask any questions that you wish, and we'll deal with those questions as we come along. So some of you may or not, you may know Frank. Certainly the people that work in First Canada have all seen the tweets and the blogs, and we've had meetings with Frank when we go down for our June conferences. So we do see him on a regular basis, but you may not. So this is a chance to get to know Frank a little bit better as we go along. So Frank Merrick, as it says here, is the director of FRC and a graduate of RPI and UNH. Now, RPI, in case you don't know, is Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, and UNH is the University of New Hampshire. So Frank, it says here that you have coached or are coaching FRC, FLL, and FLL junior teams.
Yes, and so I I actually started with First as a mentor on a team right in Manchester, New Hampshire. That was in 2003, and that was when I was working for an organization that is now a strategic partner of First, and that is Rockwell Automation. They actually had a manufacturing plant probably about 2 blocks from First headquarters, and I was the manufacturing, engineering, and quality manager there. And I got a cold call from Team 131 Chaos, and they said they had just, all they did was call in and ask for the engineering manager, and I was the only engineering manager in the place. And so it just got forwarded to me. And I had heard, we brought them in, I had heard a little bit about First, because especially living in New Hampshire and in Manchester, where Dean Kamen is based as well, and DECA, his company, you can't help but hear about kind of First and Dean's activities. So we brought them in, and we found them some build space in the basement. We got some of the other engineers that were on staff there to be mentors. We provided them some sponsorship, and I kind of just fell in love with First. And from there, I started a few FLL teams and some FLL junior teams, and then maybe I guess about 10 years ago now, this opportunity came up with at First to actually work directly for First, and it just happened to be a good fit because I got my degree. They were looking for someone with an engineering degree and an MBA, and I got my engineering degree from RPI and my MBA from UNH. So things just kind of clicked, and the moral of the story is it's good to be lucky and in the right place at the right time. I'll tell you. I guess that's what my takeaway from my life is, anyway.
Well, I'm sure it's a familiar story. Lots of people have it. It was a similar thing. I retired as a teacher in 2014, and at my retirement party, which is at a local restaurant, John Hobbins and Mark Bredner show up, and I didn't even know that they knew who I was, and all of a sudden I'm my first senior mentor. So I think people have that story all through. One of the things I will say is, if you're listening carefully and if you listen to the webinar once it's completed, I'm taking notes, because as we do on every webinar, we're going to ask a question at the end of the webinar that if you can email me the correct answer, you'll get some First Canada swag. And we'll definitely have some for you, Frank, when we meet up down in Houston or Detroit for the World Championship. Yeah. So we'll get some sizing later.
Very nice.
So in addition to myself, we have on today from First Canada, Christine Bibick from Kingston, who is well known as the lead mentor of the Waffles FRC team, but is also the FLL junior partner for Ontario. And Christine, partly because I have this bad cold and I have to keep muting myself because I'm coughing constantly, she's going to take some of the go through some of the questions that we've asked Frank to think about. And so I'm going to turn it over right now to Christine and can start asking some of our questions.
Great, thanks, Paul. So, Frank, we've got some for you. I hope you're up to this. But and the first question we have is, how long does it take to come up with a game?
Oh, good Lord. I mean, I'll tell you, some of the games we had, for example, last year's game, Power Up, was based on a concept called domination, that a game concept called domination that one of our mechanical engineers, who happens to no longer be with us, but he was at the time, came up with. And I think that concept itself was probably 2 or 3 years old. And so it's from inception to completion, it can be many years. Now, once we start working on it, it's about a year's worth of effort, honestly, to take it from the point where we say, this is the concept that we're going with, to sort of kick off. Now, we've been trying to do a little better with that, and because when you have a sort of a relatively short development cycle like that, and you are looking at purchasing equipment and ensuring that we have all the game pieces that we need and so forth, we really need a little more time than that. So I would say that we've kind of extended it maybe to like 18 months or so, and we actually work several games, 2 games in parallel. That's been our most recent process, to try to get a little jump, so we're not spending so much time, so little time, I guess I should say, in completing a game.
Right. I was going to ask about that, actually, so you've already answered that question that I had. What percentage of ideas would you say get thrown out?
Let's see, over 95%.
Wow.
So we end up, what we do is we have a process by which we generate sort of a number of very basic concepts, and we put them on what is logically called a game concept sheet. And they're really 1-pagers, or maybe, some people might stretch it to 2 or 3 pagers, but for the most part, all the basic core concepts are on a single sheet of paper. And there is, I guess maybe thrown out isn't exactly the best way to describe it. There are concepts that are advanced in the current round, and those that are sort of set aside. And we actually have a situation where we call a bench. We have a game bench so to make it to the bench of concepts, which every concept on the bench we feel has some viability to it and would likely make a decent game if it was worked on hard enough. But we have, I think right now we have maybe 8 concepts on the bench, but that came out of, those concepts on bench came out of dozens of different concepts that never made it to the bench. I wouldn't say that we've thrown them out. I would say maybe we've put those particular concepts in the fridge. No, in the freezer. They've been put in the freezer. They can, we might pull them out like 4 or 5 years from now. They might have a little freezer burn, but we can make do.
That's great. And so, who exactly is involved in this whole process? Like, just sort of generally speaking. I know you have a game committee.
Well, what we do, the way that in years past, we used to say that we had a game design committee. And honestly, in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years or so, we've internally anyway migrated away from that term, because committee, I don't know how you feel about it, but committee from my sense gives the impression of a bunch of people kind of locked in a room, and they're sort of walled off from the real world, or walled off from input and output, and from folks that may have experience that just don't happen to be there. And so we say more that we have a game. Right now we've migrated to game design team, which sounds at least a little bit more open. The way it really works is we have the core folks working on the game are first employees, but what we do is sort of all along the way we have different inputs. As an example, just a few months ago, we had we brought in when we were looking at refilling sort of our game shelf, and we had, for example, reps from helping us out. We had like a weekend, or maybe it was a Friday and Saturday situation. We had folks from Rockwell Automation, folks from National Instruments. We had DJ Knight, who you've probably seen working with us on Twitch before. We had some volunteers. We had representatives from First Lego League and First Tech Challenge, and I don't know if we had anyone from First Lego League Junior, but maybe we did. And kind of marketing and folks that typically wouldn't get involved in the sort of the nitty gritty to help us sort through these games that we had going on the shelf. And then as we get closer, when we get the manual at about the game manual for a particular year, maybe at the 80% point or 85% point, we actually bring in a rules review committee. And the rules review committee is made up of volunteers and some key mentors. I'm sure if I were to list the names, you would recognize many of them, who sign a non-disclosure agreement, and we bring them in and we show them the game. So they see the game sort of months in advance. Now, part of the NDA that we have them sign, they commit to, because some of them are actively on mentors. Now, obviously, that would be an unfair advantage if they were to go back, because they've seen 80% of the game. You can't not think about the game once you've seen it. It's impossible. And so they commit, and we trust them. They're trustworthy folks, of course, to not be involved in strategy discussions with their team for at least 1 week after the game is actually revealed. So having that little bit of openness, in a very careful way, we think we end up with better games, because the rules review committee will often point out things like, what about this particular aspect, or have you thought about this, or this is a way that maybe this game could be broken, and it really makes the process, I think, much more effective. So it's a much more open process than it has been. It was, say, maybe 10 years ago, and many more people are involved, and I believe that it's a better process than we had before.
That's great. I didn't know all of that, so that's really really informative. The next question I have is about the game parts. So why are there so many different? Why are the parts of the game so different? So some years we've had frisbees and climbing things and all kinds of different things like that. Is there a reason why they're so diverse?
There is, actually. So we think of students in FIRST Robotics Competition as sort of having a career as a student. And we hope that career is 4 years long or longer. We have, of course, folks from 8th grade that occasionally join us, but say the average is 3 to 4 years. That maybe they join as a freshman and they leave as a senior, or they start as a freshman, or start as a sophomore and leave as a senior. Or do you use those terms in Canada?
You don't.
You don't? So what do you say?
So we say
like 9th grade, 10th grade?
9th. Yeah, that's right. That's what we do.
Okay, so
we've learned to translate, though, over the years.
Well, I'll translate into Canadian in my head. So if you're starting in 9th grade and you go to 11th grade, or you start in 10th grade and you're going to 12th grade, so maybe you have a 3-year sort of career as a student. And what we'd love to do is kind of present a variety of challenges over those years. And at the same time, we also recognize we have mentors. Many of our students go on to become mentors, and many of our mentors have been involved with the program for 20 years. And so how do we come up with these? The intent is that we come up with a variety of challenges, and maybe the challenges are ones that haven't been seen before. But I'll tell you that really is a difficult problem for us to solve, because there are only so many things you can do with kind of a, whatever, the size robot that we have and the field that we have. You're moving objects around, or you're repositioning the robot, but the team really does work very hard to come up with new ideas, because we want that sort of a variety, right, so that teams aren't experiencing the same thing. Or now, if you go on like Chief Delphi or you talk to folks, sometimes they'll think, well, there's a pattern. right? It's like, oh, they do a
Yeah.
ball every other year, or no, it's a ball, non-ball, odd object, or something like that. I'm here to tell you that there is no. Now, you may not believe me, but I'm promising you there is no pattern to that. The only pattern, as we said, is that, as I'm saying, we try to bring in some variety, and you would be unlikely, although not impossible, but it would be unlikely, for example, if we had a 10-inch foam ball one year, we probably wouldn't use a 10-inch foam ball the next year unless it was being used in a very different way. Now, anything could change, but that's, we do want that kind of variety. But I promise you,
Right.
there is no set pattern, because if the game design is hard enough. So the question to ask for anyone who thinks that there is a pattern, the question to ask yourself would be, what would our purpose be in wanting a pattern? It would just be another constraint that we would place on ourselves. And the FRC, the First Robotics Competition game design process, is already, in my mind anyway, already plenty constrained.
Right. Right. Ah, well, that's really interesting, because I've heard those same things on Chief Delphi or wherever, right? That
it's not true, or at least that I'm not admitting that it's true. So you can pick which one you want to go with here.
So
Okay,
before we go on to some more of the questions that we have on the sheets, we have a couple from our listeners. One
excellent.
says, will the structure and strategy of team divisions for Worlds ever change? Some teams would like to see more diversity in the competition schedule. For example, playing more teams than just in their division, even if they don't make playoffs.
I would never say never to anything. But I do feel like right now we're kind of in a groove with sort of the size of the divisions, the subdivisions, I guess, the subdivisions that we have at a championship. They feel not too large, not too small. Teams can get a decent number of matches in, and it really is the assignment to championship subdivisions truly is random. What we do is, I think we've explained this before on a blog somewhere, what we do is we take all the rookies and we just assign them across the 6 divisions, so that you essentially get roughly the same number of rookies in each subdivision. And then we take all the veterans and do the same thing. And I think it may be just sort of the order that they signed up for the event. So there is sort of, you do get a big mix. And I know sometimes folks say that, I know that sometimes folks say, well, it would be better to sort of level the divisions out in terms of points or something. That's possible to do, and that's actually what's done in the Michigan district. But of course, Michigan district, they all play each other, and they already have this sort of set point system that they could be using. But and I know that the method that we use for first championship does not lead to sort of the most level divisions all the time, but typically it's pretty good. So I don't see a time when we were somehow have teams play cross division. And the idea is that you're already playing with a sort of a mix of folks because of the process that we use to assign folks to subdivisions. So I don't see that, but I would say, like I said, never say never. I can't tell you what the championship is going to look like, sort of 10 years from now, after I'm retired. You know what I'm saying? I
hate to tell you this, Frank. There's no exit plan. So
I've heard that.
The second question from our online listeners: how do you decide when it's prop, ball, or cube overload? Is the field reset tested a certain amount of time and pass some sort of test? Can there be too many game pieces on the field, I guess?
I'll answer that final question first. There absolutely can be too many game pieces on the field, and I think we are pushing that count with 2017 game Steamworks. We do some rough idea. We come up with some rough idea of kind of what field reset would be like. We talk through it. It's not really possible for us to test it completely. We do. Occasionally we do test, for example, robots on full fields when we are doing filming in no November, and of course we are testing robots on sort of partial fields with prototypes and so forth all throughout the process. I wouldn't say that we fully test sort of exactly what field reset would be like. But we did, for example, we did have to test the ball curve, you know what, I'm not going to be able to think of the name, in Steamworks, the fuel release objects, which, you know what, this completely slipped my mind what those were called. The hoppers, that's what it was. Yes, thank you so much. The hoppers. The with, you know, of course those are tests, and we saw the balls go everywhere, and we said, oh, these are going to be a pain to pick up, and yep, they were a pain to pick up. Now we still I think had a decent, it wasn't an awful situation. We were able to still come pretty close to our desired turn times there, at least towards the end of the season. But for that reason, you would, I would never say never, but you probably wouldn't see like a situation where there are thousands of ping pong balls or golf balls that would need to be picked up. So it is a consideration. But honestly, there's only so much that we can test with the amount of time that we have and the number of folks that we have to do that.
Okay, Christine?
I was just going to point out that there's some questions in the chat box as well. So for those of you that are listening, if you have questions, you can put them in the question box or chat box if you can't figure out how to do the question box. Are you able to see them there? Or do you want me to just keep going, Paul?
I can see them. Do you want me to? You don't. You're not asking me to do something, are you? I'm sorry,
well,
my mind wandered. My mind. I'm sorry, my mind wandered a little bit there.
Sure, if you want to take a stab at, if you want to take a stab at a couple of them in the chat box, that would be great.
Sure. Let's see here. Can you give your rating? Okay, here's one. Can you give a rating of the lottery system for how teams select events? Do you see this changing anytime soon? I think the lottery system addressed a serious issue that we had with teams that are have a significant number of mentors and really have more resources kind of at their command, could be hovering at their keyboards at exactly noon on a Thursday. And it was this sort of first come, first serve, of course, is just this full rush to get your event. And we really wanted to get away from that. We thought it was not great for the teams that maybe you don't hear so much from so often. Teams that don't, you know, maybe all their mentors are, you know, teaching school, and maybe they only have 2 mentors, and they just can't be around to kind of take advantage of that first come, first serve situation. So in my mind, I mean, we published some stats over the last few years, and boy, I wish I could remember the numbers, but in the blog that we did just a few weeks ago, we talked about the percentage of teams that got their first choices, and it was a pretty decent percentage. And most teams got their first or second choice, and I think only something like 5 or 6 teams or less than that actually got their third choice. So to me, that's a pretty successful approach. I don't see that changing anytime soon. I think we had more success this year than we did last year. One of the reasons was, as well as people, I think, in general, understanding what the process was, and aside from us not having any glitches like we had last year, sort of in the process, that we also eased back on the number of slots that were being reserved at regionals. The first year we reserved, and we worked with the regional directors, of course, on this. The first year we reserved more slots because everyone was a little bit nervous. Like, is this going to work out? Are my local teams going to be able to get into our events or not? And this year we kind of stepped that back a little bit, and I think it showed in that we just had more availability and right off the bat. And I think that, in my mind, it was pretty successful. Great. So I would rate it a success. I wouldn't say there's a problem with any sort of assignment system we would use. There's always downsides, but I would put successful stamp on that particular one. Not that we're not always looking for improvements and so forth, but it worked out pretty well.
That's great. Great to hear your side of things, because you know, we don't always know sometimes where things come from and what's happening on the other side. So it's really great. So tell us, we'll go back to some of the questions here that were sent in ahead of time. Is it hard to come up with different parts of the game to make them work together?
Yes, I mean, I would say that, yes. Next question, please. No,
that's fine.
I will say the game design process is the game design process. Sorry, I swore I told you I was gonna translate into Canadian tonight. The game design process is probably the biggest challenge I've ever been involved with in my working career. It's simply extraordinarily difficult to come up with a decent first robotics competition game. Thinking through all of the various constraints that we have, and that we're putting a game in front of nearly coming up on 4,000 very smart teams. And we want to make sure it works for everyone. We want to make sure that it's at least playable by kit bots, but that at the same time, we stretch the capabilities of our very best teams. And we have to create, unlike other sports that I know about, our playing field, you have absolute rookies and teams that have been playing for 20 years, and they're on the same field at the same time. And we want to make sure, and that's intentionally, of course, because we want our younger teams to be able to be inspired by and learn from our more senior teams. And so, so you have to have games in which those very simple robots can still be on an alliance and make a contribution while accomplishing something meaningful. Because that's the whole point, is that we don't want to give points away. We want the robots to be doing something and the teams to feel they come away. Ultimately, for me, because this is what I've learned in my years at First, at any event, 25% of the teams are guaranteed to be in the bottom 25% of the rankings, right? It's like a math thing. And so we want to make sure that teams, even those teams that don't do so well sort of in ranking and don't get picked for playoffs and so forth, that when they get back on their bus or they get back on their subway or however they're getting home, they say, you know, we didn't win an award, we weren't in playoffs, but you know what, we accomplished that one thing. You know, we got autonomous to work in the very last match. Whatever that situation was, we want them to have a legitimate accomplishment that they can point to, and that they can say, you know, next year we're going to do a little better than that. You know, we're going to do more. Maybe we're going to rank a little higher, but they are encouraged to keep going. For me, that's a success. We don't want anyone, we want the bottom ranked team at every event to feel, you know what, this was still a positive experience for me, legitimately, not because we're shooting some platitudes at them or, you know, you saying slogans or something, but that because they actually accomplished something that is not easy.
Right. Wow, that's great. I can't believe how fast this half hour is going. I'm going to throw it back to Paul for a bit here, because I know our time is coming quickly to a close. So Paul, do you want? I know you're more familiar with the questions that have been asked. So, do you want to ask any in particular, or head in a
I have a
couple.
I think, and one's from one of the people online. But what I would say,
Paul, I can say, just to let you know, I am fine with going longer. Honestly.
Okay.
And we didn't talk about this, but if we want to, you know, talk till you know, for another 30 minutes or so. What I'm saying is we don't have to stop because of me.
Okay.
I am happy to, if you guys still want to hear me, I'm happy to keep talking.
I have to say this has been so interesting. There's things I'm learning. I can't even believe it. But what I was going to say was this was the bane of my existence as a teacher. I could never get the timing right. Either I'd have stuff that would last 80 minutes and I only had 20 minutes, or I'd have stuff I thought was going to last 80 minutes and it would last 2 minutes. So that's That's certainly something I have experienced. One of the questions we do have from Kim, and it sort of ties in with our next webinar on Tuesday with equity, diversity, and inclusion. That's being led by two FSMs in Canada, Annika Pint and Phoebe Arcilla from out west. Kim writes, how do you consider accessibility of gameplay for students with disabilities?
Oh, this is a real challenge for us. We do have for regionals, and I believe the districts do this as well. We do have provide wheelchair ramps so that drive team members that are in wheelchairs can still participate as sort of drivers or operators, sort of on the drive team. But it is a real challenge for us when you have games that require some mobility. We try hard to take that into account, and I'll just say that is another one of our big challenges in developing these games. Is we would love to be able to design games that everyone can sort of play equally, to folks that aren't able to move around so well, folks that are have vision impairments, folks that have hearing impairments. I will just say I don't have a good answer for this one. It's a real challenge. We do think of it, and we probably need to think some more about it. But I mean, one of our hopes, of course, also is that the first robotics competition experience isn't just about what happens on the field. Because if with an average of 20 or 25 students for each team, most of the students are not involved on the field, right? It's something that they're providing support in their pits. Maybe they're doing software work. They're off scouting and that kind of thing. And some of those roles might be more accessible. I know that that's not a great answer, but I'll just say that it is something that we think of and we do. Oh, I'll tell you what, we recently made a change as an example. This might be I think it's a minor point, and I may even mess up this story. I hope I don't, but someone had pointed out to us that colorblind folks were having trouble seeing what state the various sort of field was in when you're talking about whether you're allowed to go on the field or not allowed to go on the field. And so we changed around, if I recall right, we changed around some of those field lights so that they're, instead of just having color, they were also blinking as a way to indicate, what the state of the field was. So we do try to make things better when we can, but it's a great question, and it's just very tough for us. That was a lot of words. I'm sorry.
No, that's really nice to know. I know a lot of kids, even on my team, have talked in the past about height for the human players being a factor some years, and how much they appreciate those games where it's not, not an issue.
Well,
it's a big difference.
That height one, I'll tell you, that comes up just about every. It's a little bit. We want to be like a sport, but we don't want to be too much like a sport. Like if you're on a basketball team, height is an advantage, period. Right. I mean, there's only so much you can do, right? I mean, and even if you're on a first robotics competition team, being taller helps. And we do have, of course, there is a rule that allows team members that have a disability, they're allowed to bring equipment into the drive station that helps to correct that disability. And so there are occasions when we have team members that are on the shorter side that they can sort of bring a step stool in. And of course that gets into a discussion point too, because we don't say, hey, you have to be shorter than this height in centimeters or whatever you people use in Canada. I don't know. It's such a confusing. I just can't. Centimeters, decameters, whatever it is. But anyway, you have to be below some certain height to before you can use a stool. We wouldn't want to do that, because then begin to, can I take my shoes off? It's a very difficult situation.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. In Detroit, um, I was in registration for 14 hours a day, so people could easily find me. And I was hearing that there were issues trying to get wheelchairs in and out for spectators. So, like what you're saying about
Oh,
the
yeah.
it being more than just what's going on in the driver's station is true.
Oh,
So that was
absolutely. And we try to set
yeah,
aside, at championship, we try to set aside spaces for wheelchairs sort of right at floor level, but even that really is a challenge because honestly, um, our games aren't always the best to watch right from floor level. I
yeah,
mean, you don't see a lot of
hmm
professional games where usually the shots are sort of from up above, so you can see the sort of the movement of the players, and in our case, sort of the robots. So, and in our case, just like in professional sports, in our case, we have refs and folks, and kind of watching the field, and they have to be up close, and it's possible for them to block view. So
yeah.
it's a challenge for us.
hmm So on this slide, I think you answered most of the questions.
Yeah, I think
Um,
most of them have been. Maybe a little bit about the FL and FTC
yeah,
we
well,
didn't cover, but
I just wonder about that.
that's okay.
But we'll move on because we have.
Okay.
Oh, there's a good one. So why don't you? Because I'm gonna have a coughing fit in a second, Christine. So why don't you head off on take this?
Okay. What's your biggest worry when the game gets played for the first time?
I'll tell you, I pretty much hold my breath
Hold your
for the
breath.
first time.
I was
The game
imagining
is,
that actually.
it's extraordinarily tense because we're, while we attempt to do some playthroughs ourselves. We don't really build robots to do the playthroughs. We test smaller aspects of what the robot may have to do. For example, during the Ultimate Ascent, we built a frisbee throwing device just to make sure that a fairly simple mechanical device could throw a frisbee, and it could, and it was great. And the same year, when climbing the pyramids, we built a robot that had no wheels, that just had this simple sort of climbing mechanism, and we saw it go up a couple rungs, and we said, "Oh, great! A robot can climb the pyramid." But we just simply don't have the resources to build sort of 6 robots fully fledged that can play the game. So we do human player playthroughs, and we talk about it, and we speculate, and we try to think about what the teams are going to be doing when they try to play the game. But we also have never seen 6 robots from 6 real teams play the game until sort of that first match. Now, those do tend to be the first matches that we see happen to be at week 0, which is just before Stop Build Day. And even then, we get some teams together in New Hampshire, and we have a real field there, and we watch them play. That gives us some indication, but of course, being 2 or 3 days or 4 days before Stop Build Day, that means that we are still looking at unfinished robots as well. I mean, most teams don't come to Stop Build Day or week 0, which is on the Saturday before the Tuesday of Stop Build, with complete robots. Some do, or something approaching that, but I'll tell you, we're just holding our breath. And so the biggest worry is that we have just simply missed something that was not in our minds at all, and that there's sort of some way to play the game we didn't expect, or sort of even worse, the game is just, for whatever reason, unplayable. And luckily, we've never really been in that. We haven't been in that situation. But I will say that that's always the concern, that we just don't know. I don't think there has ever been a game, at least since I've been in game design, where the folks on the game design team said, "You know what? We have nailed this one. We have knocked it out of the park." It is never like that. It's more like, boy, I'm not sure about this one. almost all the games are more like that. We are never saying, well, we'll just kick back. We did everything we could on this one. It's not like that at all.
Right. And certainly having lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds involved. Hopefully you're being as you're proactive, right? You've thought of most of those things. Hopefully.
Hopefully, and that's exactly why we bring in that rules review team, because by the time rules review weekend rolls around, the folks that are sort of on the core teams, the core game design team, have been staring at this game for months.
Right.
And they can't see what they can't see. And I want to say that I'm not actually, myself personally, am not on the core design teams for the any of the games. I mean, I drop in, I get check-ins, I see how things are going, but I'm not actually a core team member of the game design staff. It's too hard, so I let the other people in FRC handle it.
And how does one get involved with the creation of the games? Like, if you wanted to be on that team, are there opportunities for that?
Well, so this is there are a couple different ways. For example, just recently, before we had our concept, before we went through and reviewed our concepts, we put a call out to the community saying, send us your game design concepts. And I'm trying to think, I don't remember, boy, my memory is just off tonight. I can't remember the number of concepts that we got in, but many of the community members sent in concepts. And when we got to, I think, our final 9 or so, 3 or 4 of those, don't quote me now on the numbers. Well, you don't have to quote me because I'm going to be on a recording, but 3 or 4 out of those 9 were actually from the community, made it all the way through to that point. So now those folks will never know who they were.
Right.
We didn't contact them and said, hey, congratulations. But maybe, who knows, 2,
they
3,
might be on that
years,
bench, right?
they might be sitting on that bench, and 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, who knows, they might look at it and snap their fingers and say, that's the one I submitted. It could happen.
Right.
In terms of the rules review committee, what we do is we sort of internally generate a list of folks that we think will be good candidates. Either they're sort of prominent members of the community, or we know of them, or maybe they're up and coming sort of volunteers that are doing a great job, that kind of thing. So it's not the kind of thing that occasionally we've had folks volunteer, and that's great, and we consider them, but for the most part that list is sort of generated by ourselves, because many of our especially down with our engineering staff, many of them are very, very involved in the community themselves. I'm not personally a mentor anymore, but many of them are, and many of them are very involved in kind of following all the matches and keeping up with what's happening sort of in the community as a whole. And of course we have an FRC team advocate. Her name is Jamie Luce, who also is trying to keep a pulse on things in the community and watching what's going on the various, Facebook and Twitter and sort of all the platforms. So that's where we kind of pick our members from.
Okay, great. So my last question from this slide, what would your favorite game be? And we are just, mentioning favorite. That is spelt correctly.
Okay. Oh, it's got that U in there. Why do Canadians waste time with that U in there? That word could be a whole letter shorter if that wasn't.
It could be. Good. I won't deny that.
I'm joking, of course. I love Canada. So my favorite game so far, I think, would have to be 2016 Stronghold, and I'll tell you why. Because that was the game where we really sort of broke the mold. It was the first year where, because we used to do these game hints. Do you remember game hints?
Yes.
That were really,
understood. Yes.
They were fun, kind of, but they were really, really inside the tent, what we call inside the tent. Like you had to already know all about FRC to have sort of any interest in these at all. And then came up there, I said, let's do a teaser instead of doing a hint. Let's do a teaser. Let's show them something. And we're even going to tell them the name of the game and give them the logo. And I just remember when that first came out, and it was so exciting. And then when we got to, and then the game itself, we broke some new ground. With
players on the field.
Well, we had in 2016, we had, that was when we had the changeable field. Right. And so we had literally more combinations of field than we played matches, like 12,000. There was, 18,000 different combinations of the field that you could potentially have. And there were just the concept of a field that actually changed shape. And there was just some logic to the way the game was being played. It's basically a tower defender game. So, okay, you're defending your tower. You are going to pick defenses that the other, your opposing alliance has to cross. It just sort of made sense. And I remember walking into, I don't know if either any of you have ever been to kickoff in Manchester, but there's this kind of this big gym space at a college nearby, university nearby, where we have we're getting ready to unveil the game, and there's like 1,000 people there. I don't know. It's just a lot of teams come down to get their kits. It's like a regular kickoff, to get their kit in that part anyway. They get their kits, and there's just a lot of people there. And I remember walking in the doors there and just being greeted by this wall of noise. They were the students and everyone there was so completely pumped for this game to be released. And I think the fact that we had sort of a theme and that we had sort of primed the pump a bit by releasing the name, and you knew what the theme was going to be, and we had these these banners that you could create and so forth to put on the field. It was just the crowd was just unbelievably ready for the game. So it was more, and then the game itself played pretty well as also, it wasn't perfect. No game is perfect, but it played pretty well also. So just that whole sort of package that we, in my mind anyway, we really sort of broke the mold and broke open the FRC season, because normally when we say FRC season, we mean, it starts in January and it goes till April. Well, no, that was the year that we extended it. It started in the fall, and then it went all the way through championship. So we really broke open that sort of the little box that we had put the FRC season in.
Wow. Well, I think we have a game suggestion for the game team.
We do.
Okay.
But first, we wanted to thank you, Frank, for the Rebound Rumble, because as we all know, it's a Canadian-themed game. You probably knew that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Because, of course, it was invented by a Canadian. Basketball was invented by a Canadian, Dr. James Naismith. I don't know if you're aware of that. You seem to know a lot about Canada.
He was a Canadian?
Born in Almonte, Ontario. That was when it was easier to go back and forth between the United States and Canada, I believe.
Okay.
She didn't need a passport.
But he invented it, are you sure that he was still a Canadian citizen when he invented it, though? Because it wasn't invented in the U.S.?
It was someplace in, I think it was Springfield or something like that.
Oh, yeah, that sounds right, yeah.
We're going to lay claim to it, too, though.
But it is about time for another Canadian-themed game, so we have a suggestion.
Get ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
We're going to call
Drum roll.
it Recycle Rush 2.
Ready, let's see it. Poutine! Oh, my
Poutine
God.
game.
You're not going to believe this.
You can't have a poutine story.
I had poutine just Saturday.
Oh,
I was at a restaurant and with my family, and we said, poutine, we got to order some poutine. It's so good.
Well,
what's better than gravy and cheese on French fries?
Well, you could add bacon too. I mean, that's not what they do, but bacon helps. So we reuse the frisbees. We color one brown for the gravy. We have the pool noodles. They're going to be the fries. We'll call them frites, just to be in the theme of the French word for French fries. And then the airship can be converted into a big fries basket, and then things get tossed. We haven't figured it all out. We're still debating about the cheese curds,
You're still working through that.
but I think it would be a hit on this side of the border, anyways.
That's fantastic.
We'll see if it makes it to the bench or not.
Wow. Can't put it in the freezer because they won't last. I'm just saying.
You know what? I've never. You know what? Honestly, I've never known anyone who's tried poutine who has not liked it. So this might be the perfect game.
There you go. All I know is that when this recording gets out, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail that I'm pronouncing it poutine instead of poutine, which is the way they like to pronounce it. But I'm sorry, I'm not. I'm saying it's poutine. That's just. I'm making that call. But anyways, we wanted to thank you, Frank. It's been a great evening, and thanks for hanging on a little bit longer and taking a few more questions.
Oh, sure, no
There's
problem.
Lots more that we could have definitely talked about. It was great to get that question about the diversity and the inclusion, because it leads into next week's webinar with Annika Pint, first senior mentor from Ontario, and Phoebe Arcilla, first senior mentor from Calgary. We're going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And of course, we do have our own EDI badges in Canada that we give out to people that pass, that take Shelley Henderson's EDI modules. And if they pass that, I'm assuming you have done them, Frank.
I have, yes.
Okay, well, in addition to some swag, we'll send you an EDI badge that you can put on as well. But once again, I appreciate you doing this. It's been great. And
sure, hey, no problem. And if anyone has like additional questions for me or comments, feel free to email me at fmerrick@firstinspires.org. I can't promise how quickly I might get back to them. We're sort of in the middle of everything right now, but I promise you I do read them all. And typically I have some time to at least come up with a little bit of response, even if it's just thanks for the email and remove the you from your words because you have too many of them.
Well, I have to say in closing that Blair Huntermark was absolutely correct. You were hilarious. It was great to have you on, and we look forward to seeing you in Houston and Detroit when we get there. So
thanks so much, and we'll see you all later. And good luck with the. It's going to be a great season. We've got a great season lined up, and good luck everyone with it.
Thanks very much, and good night.
Thanks.
Everybody.
Do we have a question for our trivia?
Oh, yes, we do have a question for our trivia. Thanks for reminding me. It seems like I'm having some senior moments. So Frank said almost right at the beginning, so if you didn't hear it, you came on late, or you're listening to it in the recording, he said right near the beginning, the team number of the first team that he was a mentor of back in 2003, I think it was, he said.
Yep.
You can tell me what team number it is. So if you email that team number to me at pkeenan@firstinspires.org, sometime before midnight, we'll pick a winner from the list of correct answers. So thank you very much, and thanks for reminding me, Christine. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks again, Frank.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.